This is Bloomberg Businessweek Daily, reporting from the magazine that helps global leaders stay ahead, with insight on the people, companies, and trends shaping today's complex economy, plus global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Businessweek Daily with Carol Massar and Tim Stenovec, live on Bloomberg Radio, television, YouTube, and Bloomberg Originals.
And a very good afternoon, everybody, across Bloomberg platforms. Welcome to Bloomberg Businessweek Daily. Yes, indeed. No surprise to see it being a busy Monday. I felt like it was a busy Friday, and we expected a lot over the weekend. It is Monday, though, and I feel like we are having some conflicting messages today.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. I mean, the president out early this morning talking about what he's going to do to wind down the war, and we're seeing equities move higher as a result. It's a broad-based move in the S&P 500, Carol, up more than 1.5%. Only 65 stocks lower in the S&P 500.
And yet we're off our best levels of the session.
Yeah.
It's been kind of interesting pre-market going into the open to kind of where we are. I think it's also safe to say that there are a lot of questions out there. We do see WTI crude also sliding back, President Trump backing off his ultimatum with Iran. And yet, again, we want to try and figure out exactly what's going on from the Washington perspective, the Middle Eastern perspective, because it just, again, feels like there's some conflicting messaging.
We're going to have views from both of those areas of the world. Also, the rewired global FX markets. Because of the war, we're going to speak with Jayati Bharadwaj. She's head of FX strategy over at TD Securities.
All right, looking forward to that. And plus, we're going to get into Apple's nice guy, heir apparent. It is today's Bloomberg Big Take. It's an incredible write-through by Mark Gurman. He's also got some other reporting out when it comes to Apple, but this isn't a guy we talk about a lot.
Not yet.
Not yet.
And he's responsible for some things at Apple that haven't always gone according to plan, which I love about Mark's piece.
Yeah. So, all right, we're going to talk about
He's made some
that.
mistakes, let's just say that.
But he's been there a long time, and yet he's still pretty young. Just going to say. All right, we're going to get into it in just a moment. Stick around, everybody. First up, let's get you going with a check on the trade, your top business stories. Here's Amy Morris in for Charlie Pellet.
All right. Thank you, Carol. President Trump said the U.S. was talking with a respected Iranian leader and claimed the Islamic Republic was eager for a deal to end the war. But Iran says there are no talks going on with the U.S. Trump did extend a deadline for Iran to reopen the Strait of Hormuz or face attacks on its power plants. That gives Iran an additional 5 days. And that's moved markets. WTI down nearly 10%, around $89 per barrel. And Brent crude dropping more than 10%, now near $100 per barrel. Bloomberg Intelligence analysts say oil prices are primed to rise despite Brent's recent dip below $100 per barrel, as unresolved disruptions in the Strait of Hormuz keep the market structurally tight. We do check these markets for you all day long here at Bloomberg. The S&P 500 now up 1.5%, NASDAQ up 1.6%, and the Dow up 1.8%. The 10-year Treasury yield at 4.33%, the 2-year yield at 3.83%. Bitcoin about 1.25% higher, around $71,000. Chicago Fed President Austin Goolsbee says he could envision the U.S. Central Bank needing to raise interest rates or returning to rate cuts. It all depends on how the war plays out. Fed Governor Stephen Miron says the central bank shouldn't set policy based on short-term considerations related to the war in Iran. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Amy Morris. That's Bloomberg Business Flash. More now from Bloomberg Businessweek Daily with Carol Massar and Tim Stenovec.
So appreciate it. All right, Amy Morris in there for Charlie Pellet. All right, folks, just looking at our live blog on the U.S. war in Iran, we have President Trump saying that the Strait of Hormuz to reopen soon under a joint control with the United States. Iranian media denying negotiations have taken place. We mentioned Brent crude falling back. We mentioned WTI crude falling back as well. And then President Trump suspended threatened strikes on energy infrastructure, citing talks. So this is kind of the latest on our blog. Meantime, maybe we'll ask our next guest about what we have else on the blog.
Okay, we can't leave it there, Carol.
Okay, go ahead.
So
Go
I'm going
for
to
it.
just read from
I
this
love
because
this.
Jennifer Welch, if you watch our program, if you listen to our program, you know her well at this point. She's chief geoeconomics analyst for Bloomberg Economics. She writes that several explanations could account for the contradictory messages from President Trump and Iran over talks to end the war. The most likely explanation is the U.S. is pursuing negotiations as the president searches for an off-ramp but exaggerating progress in an attempt to reassure markets.
All right, so that might explain, right, the contradictions that we are seeing. Hey, we wanted to we're going to get a view from the White House in just a moment and really the national security aspect from the United States. But right now we want to get a view from the region. We head to Istanbul and to Bloomberg News Middle East and North Africa Managing Editor Onur, and he oversees editorial direction and newsroom operations across the region. And so delighted to have him with us. Onur, thank you so much. I know it's a little bit later where you are. We are trying to understand exactly kind of what feels like contradictory statements from the White House, the U.S. versus what's coming out of Iran. Set the record straight. What do we know?
Well, we know that U.S. President Donald Trump backed down from his earlier threat to strike Iran's energy sites if Strait of Hormuz is not reopened by the end of his 48-hour deadline, which he started on Saturday evening. So basically, in about 6 to 7 hours, that deadline would have expired. But earlier today, very early in the morning in the U.S., all of a sudden we have seen that President Trump posting several messages on social media, followed by his in-person remarks to reporters in the US, where he said, unlike what he had said before, that he was talking to Iranian officials and that a deal was possible. And therefore, he gave Iran a 5-day reprieve, basically promising not to hit any energy assets in the Islamic Republic until Saturday. Those remarks were followed by repeated claims by Iranian media that said such talks never really happened. Iran, in fact, did not respond to US requests for negotiations. And the fact that Trump backed down from his earlier threats was basically down to the Iranian response to earlier US and Israeli threats in the region, and basically a function of how the war has so far unfolded. Those are the sort of two emerging main narratives coming out of the US and Iran over the last few hours.
So then how do we explain the public statements differing from what we know is happening privately, and the differences that we're hearing from Iran saying, wait a second, no, we are not having any discussions?
It's not extremely surprising. Obviously, there is this one marginal possibility that everything that's coming out of the mouth of the US president is completely false and a lie. It's plausible, but it's not very likely. What is more likely is the fact that what's happening now is a continuation of what we have seen so far during the conflict and even before the conflict. Iran and Iran's administration sees this war as an existential one, and they do not want to project any sign of weakness to their own public. So even if there is a back-channel negotiation going on with the US, which seems to exist, judging by all the reporting that we have done over the last few hours, they do not want to portray this as a negotiation between the Islamic State and its adversaries in an existential war, but instead they would like to portray this as a case where Iran has retaliated so violently and so strongly to previous US and Israeli attacks since the war began about 24 days ago, that right now the US is forced to sort of backtrack its earlier threats and steps in the war, putting Iran in this position of power and superiority in the war. So that's where I think the inconsistency is mainly coming from over the last few months.
I want to ask you, because as you said, I think it's safe to say that many would point out that on both sides you could question the messaging and what is fact, what is maybe a little bit of a massaging of the message, and the same thing out of Iran. How do we trust what we're hearing out of Iran as well?
Okay, it's not very easy, and we have been very adamant in our efforts to filter out propaganda from the actual messaging. That said, today, immediately after Trump's Truth Social posts that said that he was in talks with the Iranian leadership, we have seen a concerted effort by Iranian state-linked media outlets trying to counter that message with the message that I just explained a couple of minutes ago. This is clearly centralized. So yes, we are trying to filter out the propaganda, but there is a clear emerging pattern in Iranian media today that shows the messaging coming out of Tehran was highly centralized. And it is a closely choreographed place. We cannot talk about a free media that is free to report on anything it wants.
So, Onur, let's say that we do see an end to the conflict in the coming days. What does Iran look like post this war?
That is a very difficult question to answer, but I will do my best. According to what the US-Israeli alliance said since the beginning of the war on February 28, thousands, more than 7,000 targets in Iran have been hit. Now, they have spared the energy assets for most part of the war, but we know that administrative buildings, civilian infrastructure has been heavily targeted. So on the one hand, you have a country where the infrastructure has been very heavily degraded. On the other hand, though, if the war unfolds pretty much in a similar way to how it has so far, and if there is no conclusive peace agreement, that would allow Trump and also Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu to say that they have managed to take or extract every single concession that they wanted to going into this war. It will make Iran look like the victorious side after this war, and therefore will allow it to maintain a sense of legitimacy in the eyes of its own people and also regionally after the war is concluded.
One last thing, just quickly. This is crossing the Bloomberg terminal coming from the New York Times that the Pentagon officials are weighing deployment of air troops to Iran, and the New York Times citing defense officials on that troop deployment. If we see that, would it be assumed to be seen as an escalation on the part of Iran? And then what would that mean maybe in terms of this war? Just quickly.
I guess that would depend on where exactly those troops are going to be landed. If that happens, we have seen over the last couple of weeks that there are certain areas where the US thinks it may land its troops, such as the Karg Island, which is a key export terminal for Iran. Such a move would allow the US to maintain leverage that would allow it to force the Iranian government to come to terms on some of the key issues, such as uranium or their ties to proxy forces in the region. So it really depends a lot on where those troops might be headed and what the task, the objective of that military operation might be.
Every day, it feels like in this war, it feels like so many questions, right? As stuff comes across and headlines are known. Onur, thank you so much. I know it's later over there and you've had a busy day already, but thank you so much for sticking around and informing our audience at this hour. Onur Ant, he is Middle East and North Africa managing editor at Bloomberg News. Just want to point out on that New York Times report about Pentagon officials weighing possible troop deployment to Iran. The officials described the military's actions as prudent planning, noting that nothing had been ordered by the Pentagon nor by U.S. Central Command, which declined to comment. They said another possibility being considered should President Trump authorize U.S. troops to seize Karg Island is an attack by about 2,500 troops, or I guess the island overall is an attack by about 2,500 troops from the Marine Expeditionary Unit, which is on its way to the region.
Okay, well, let's go to Washington, D.C. and hear the latest when it comes to the war. I want to bring in White House and National Security Editor Michelle Jamrisko. Michelle, I just want you to weigh in on that New York Times story and what you're hearing from your own reporting and what you're hearing from Washington.
Well, first on that, I mean, I think, Tim, that doesn't move us very much further than where we were, which is that we knew Trump has ordered that unit from Japan to the region. We're expecting to see them arrive in the coming days to the area. But we just don't know at this point how and if they will be used. It is allowing Trump another option. So I think one of the things that we've been keeping in mind throughout this back and forth today, as we hear from the U.S. and then Iran, and as Onur so rightly pointed out, with each having their own motives to say what they've said, and forcing us to not take them at face value. Amid all that talk, we have to remember that the president retains this sort of option for kinetic action should he deem appropriate, as he has said, given talks might be flailing at that point. So, we should treat this as a potential head fake as well. This talk of, moving toward peace. This is, perhaps a tactic that the U.S. can use to kind of distract in the name of, kind of moving forward with something a little more kinetic, a little more military. And it's
like
also
what?
important to
like
note.
what? Like, let's go there. Yeah.
It's important to note, too, that this 5-day timeline that he announced this morning also does not include non-energy sites. He's been very specific. This is a call for a so-called kind of partial ceasefire, at least on the U.S.'s part, on Iran's energy sites in the region. He's not promising that there won't be some other operation. So there's just a lot of moving parts here and a lot of options that the U.S. retains for what might happen in the next hour, the next days.
Michelle, where's Israel in all of this? I mean, is the U.S. talking a lot with Israel? And I'm just curious how much they are coordinating their efforts. If Israel says, no, we got to keep going, I'm just wondering where that fits in and what kind of back channel talk is going on.
Yeah, that's been a really important question throughout all this because, as you know, when this all started on February 28th, it was U.S. and Israel moving forward. And there have been times where Israel has perhaps been a little more aggressive than the U.S. would like to admit to or be attached to. One element of that, of course, last week was on the other energy sites that were Israeli strikes that the U.S. kind of was at odds with and had contradictory statements about whether or not they were aware of the attacks. They did say they did not participate in the attacks that Israeli forces made on those energy sites. So there is, a lot of reason to question how much the two are aligned in terms of tactics. But they're both moving forward. They both have an interest in defeating the regime for whatever that's worth and however that's defined. And so we'll have to see in the coming days how they kind of play into the picture. But what we've heard from Israel is that there's no let up. They're ready to keep up attacks. They obviously have a few fronts going on. And interestingly enough, and we've got some stories on the Bloomberg Terminal around this, but in Israel, it's wildly popular to carry forward with these attacks on Iran and to move forward toward a victorious finish in this war instead of bowing out. And they do see as an extension of a war they've been fighting for more than 2 years since the October 7th attack. So this is something much more complicated and multifaceted and aggressive from Israel's part in terms of a long-term measure to defeat Iran. And so that kind of carries a different weight to where in the U.S. we're largely focused on impacts on energy markets and how that might be restraining Trump as it did this morning.
Well, let's just end there and talk a little bit about how this could end, at least from a U.S. perspective. Just in 30 seconds, negotiations, if indeed Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner are doing this, what does a negotiated end to this look like from a U.S. perspective?
Well, it could be, anything the way Trump states it. It's we don't know for sure who's involved in these talks, and you got into this a bit with Onur, but we can be certain that it's quite possible that Kushner and Witkoff are talking to someone, even if it's not the Iranian parliament speaker, as that person has denied those talks are ongoing, contradicting earlier reports today from Axios. So, the end game could look like one of the base cases is Iran keeps delaying, says they will do certain things, but this turns into a JCPOA style negotiation that goes on forever.
Michelle, thank you so much. Great context there. Michelle Jamrisko, White House and National Security Editor, joining us from our DC bureau. When we come back, another one of the most read stories on the Bloomberg.
It's 2:21 on Wall Street. I'm Amy Morris. Iran's parliament speaker posted on social media that, quote, fake news is used to manipulate the financial and oil markets and that there are no negotiations ongoing with the U.S. President Trump says talks are underway, which is why he says he's postponed airstrikes on Iranian power plants. He claims Iran reached out to the U.S. That moved oil lower and markets higher. We do check markets for you all day long here at Bloomberg. The S&P 500 is up about 1.5%. NASDAQ up about 1.5%. The Dow up 1.7%. The 10-year Treasury yield at 4.33% and the 2-year yield at 3.82%. Bitcoin about 4% higher now, topping $71,000. Brent crude is 11% lower, near $100 per barrel. LaGuardia Airport has reopened after being closed for much of today because of that collision between an Air Canada Express plane and a fire truck. 2 pilots were killed. Expect delays or cancellations. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Amy Morris. That's the Bloomberg Business Flash. Now more from Bloomberg Businessweek Daily with Carol Massar and Tim Stenovec.
All right, Amy.
Thanks so much.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Carol.
Jinx. What happens?
We both just want to talk to Mark, I think.
We do.
I think that's what it is.
Well, listen, we also want to talk about, I was trying to do a tease and a lead up.
Oh, okay.
You gave it away. Oh. Well, maybe not. Maybe not. All right. One of the largest market cap companies in the world.
Okay.
It's about to celebrate its 50th anniversary on April Fool's Day.
Okay.
And yet, one of the big questions hanging over it, Tim, is who will take over the reins next?
It's something that the current CEO doesn't really like to talk about, yet it is today's Bloomberg Big Take. And Mark Gurman highlights Apple's nice guy heir apparent. For more, let's head to Bloomberg News' LA bureau and Bloomberg News Managing Editor for Global Consumer Tech, Mark Gurman.
We like big build-ups to you. We're just going to tell you. We just like to do that.
John Ternus. It's not a name that a lot of people outside of like the immediate Apple ecosystem were super familiar with a couple years ago, but he's been at Apple for 25 years. Why is he in the position, in your view, to be the heir apparent to Tim Cook?
There are a few main reasons. One, and this is an interesting one, he's 50 years old, which makes him 15 years younger than Tim Cook, and at least 10 years younger than the rest of Apple's executive team, people who would be in position to take the CEO role. Tim Cook is not going anywhere imminently, right? I still think it's going to be at least another year to go before he's no longer CEO, maybe 2 to 5 years, who knows at this point, right? I mean, everything in his world is Apple, so it's a hard position to move on from. And that means that the rest of the executives who could take over are going to be even older, right? And so you need someone in the role who could take over and be in that position for 10 to 20 years. And that really leaves you only with John Ternus. Aside from that, he's the only person on the executive team who has successfully launched hardware, software, integrated products. He is essentially in charge of their products, which generate 80% of revenue for the company. He's known for his political acumen. He's known for empowering leaders under him at Apple. He's known for getting into the weeds on the technical side. He would be a different type of CEO for Apple, right? Steve Jobs was an innovator, a designer, a product genius, really a visionary. Tim Cook was a visionary when it came to operations and sales and finances. And Ternus, in his own right, is a maestro of engineering, solving hard problems, bringing devices to market, drumming up new products. So that's going to be a different type of CEO, but I still think it would be a continuity pick in the sense that he's worked under Tim for a very long time, well north of a decade. He's been a senior VP at Apple for about 5 years at this point. And he's someone Apple's been pushing to the forefront in its marketing, in its keynotes, meetings with government regulators, meetings with press, local, in different jurisdictions around the world, different Apple campuses and offices globally. So this is someone who's at the forefront of the CEO race at Apple right now.
Mark, so much here at Bloomberg, what we'll talk about when we're going through a different economic or market cycle is that, when it comes to like a Fed chair, we need like the right Fed chairman for the era. Like I think about during the great financial crisis, during COVID, and just so on and so forth, or go all the way back to Volcker when we were dealing with inflation. What is it, like as you talk about the youth or being younger, Ternus, you talk about continuity, being an insider. I mean, is that what really Apple needs? I mean, what does it really need? And I guess
it's not what Apple needs right now. Apple needs a shakeup. Apple needs someone who's more AI-centric, and the board knows this. And in the conversations they're having within the board, the question is, do we really want the continuity pick, or do we want sort of someone who's an outlier or an outsider who could shake things up on the AI side? And what you keep coming back to is the fact that Apple is a hardware-centric company. They're a hardware platform that all these AI and other services run on on top of. And you can't really run the AI unless you have the hardware there at the forefront, right? And so the hardware picture, at least for now, it does work. But let's see if someone else emerges in the next few years. I don't think that's going to happen. Apple is such a unique culture and a unique company that you really can't bring in an outsider. So all signs point to Ternus.
Well, on Ternus's track record, Mark, one thing that surprised me, and I kind of let out this audible yelp in the newsroom when I got to this part of your story, was the missteps that he's had have been very prominent. I mean, two things that Apple moved away from that were widely seen as mistakes were happened under Ternus's tenure. Talk about the keyboard, the butterfly keyboard issue, and the touch bar.
Yeah, he's not had a good run in the mid-2010s with keyboard-related items. You had the butterfly keyboard, which was a disaster and kept breaking for typing. You had the touch bar. Now, the thing I'll say about the touch bar and the butterfly keyboard, he was the engineering implementer of these ideas. These were two things that were pushed heavily by the design team at Apple at the time. And so he was really executing on the vision that they pushed him to execute on. The design team at Apple is in a different era. They are in lockstep now with the engineering team run by John Ternus because he also oversees the design teams now, both hardware and software. So I think that it's a bit of a different situation right now. Since he became senior VP, Apple's products have improved dramatically in terms of quality and features. I mean, you see the MacBook Airs and the MacBook Pros and the iPhones these days, the durability is just insane. So I do think that that was 10 years ago. Those are notable missteps under his watch when he was running Mac hardware engineering. But certainly there's been a lot of improvement since that time.
So, I want to go back to how you started. You said Tim Cook, it could be next year, it could be 2 to 5 years. I mean, if it's longer, it actually gives, Cook some more time to kind of figure out and maybe also continue to kind of guide the strategy of the company. I mean, a lot can happen, in 2, 3, 4, 5 years. So I'm just wondering how much is, Ternus a sure thing?
Well, the longer that Tim Cook is CEO, the odds go up that Ternus is a sure thing. Because everyone else around Tim Cook on the executive team is just going to get older and older. And so that is going to leave Ternus. Like if Tim Cook steps down in 5 years, Ternus will be 55, still giving him 15 years potentially in the CEO seat, maybe longer than that. Everyone else will have aged out. I mean, you have Eddie Q, who runs services. He's pushing over 60. Greg Joswiak, who runs marketing, over 60. You have software engineering chief Craig Federighi, who's in his late 50s and has already declared publicly that he shouldn't and does not want to be CEO of Apple. You have a new CFO who's relatively young, around Ternus's age, but Apple's not going to make a CFO, their CEO. You have a new COO who's about 60. And at this point, he's going to be too old to become CEO as well. And so all of your options are gone. You had people talk about Jeff Williams for many years. He was the COO. They had been putting him in the driver's seat as a successor by giving him more product and design responsibility, but he retired at the end of last year, so he's no longer an option. There was all sorts of speculation about Angela Ahrendts. 6 years ago when she was running retail, she's out of the company as of 2019, so she's no longer an option. So basically, you're out of options unless Apple's going to go external, which would be a massive shock.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you. What's the chance that they go external, or what's the chance that they bring back somebody who left, but who also knows the culture?
Apple has a remarkably bad track record bringing in executives from the outside. Nearly everyone who they've brought in has been a failure from an outsider's perspective. They had their chief people officer, Carol Surface, who was out in 2 years. I mentioned Angela Ahrendts, the retail chief. She was out in 5 years. There's some other examples there as well. But it has not worked out pretty for them from an Apple cultural standpoint. And John Ternus, having been there for 25 years, makes it a lot simpler for him to be in the role. Lots of people at Apple. Oh, the other example I should give, by the way, is John Giannandrea, who was the AI chief. He came from Google, and that was a complete disaster, right? Yeah. So the track record on outsiders has been extremely poor, to say the least. Apple's run like a family business, right? They're keeping it in the family. It's run by the family, the same people who've been around for a very long time. And so they're going to pass it on to the next member of the family, I think.
Mark, we don't want to give the entire story away. It is one of the most read stories on the Bloomberg terminal. It is today's big take. Everybody should check it out. It's not all you have on the terminal today. A couple other stories we wanted to highlight. A scoop from you about adding search advertising to Apple Maps in a push to make services even bigger. What is Apple planning on doing to our maps?
Yeah, similar to Google and Yelp, restaurants, brands, stores will be able to bid on search queries. So, for example, a coffee shop in your area wants to bid on the term coffee. Probably that'll cost them a lot of money. But if they're the highest bidder and you search coffee in their locale, they'll pop up first as an ad on the search results. And that's an ad. So big advertising expansion for Apple. Obviously, Apple Maps is extraordinarily visible. They've been pushing ads for years now in the App Store, search ads included. They've been pushing advertising within the Apple News app and the news section in the stocks application. So definitely this is a big lever that they're pulling here to try to generate more revenue. The estimates are they made $8 million from in iOS ads, or they're going to across 2026. Putting it in Maps is probably going to double that pretty quickly.
Hey, speaking of pulling a lever, you've got another story. Man, I mean...
He still has time for us, Carol.
What's the other story? I already forgot. What did I do now?
Apple to start its AI comeback bid.
Oh, yeah.
So talk to us about that. What's coming up, this Worldwide Developers Conference, and what we might get in terms of AI levers?
Yeah, as I reported, I think first week of January, second week of January, they're going to revamp Siri as a chatbot to compete with ChatGPT and Claude and Gemini and what have you. So all the focus will be on Siri and AI.
Is this right that they report on, May 1st? I think that's an estimate.
Apple, that's an estimate. That's an estimate.
Okay.
So Mark, yeah,
that time frame is typical.
WWDC is typically for developers. I mean, that's the whole point of it. You get unveiling of iOS.
They announced the new OSs, right? Yeah. So they'll announce iOS 27, the other new operating systems, and so developers get a bunch of new frameworks and tools, and consumers get a bunch of new features. But this year is going to be lighter than usual. This is all the features are going to be about AI this year. Everything else is going to be pretty minimal.
So we're going to like Siri now?
I have no idea. I mean, I know what the features are going to be, but I couldn't tell you if they're going to work properly or not, and I couldn't tell you if consumers are going to like them. But I think if they work to an effective rate of 85%, 90%, that platform of over 2 billion users is going to pull in a lot of people.
Okay, before we let you go, shameless plug. You and I are doing a live Q&A for Bloomberg subscribers. It's on Thursday, March 26th. It starts at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. Mark Gurman, it's an Ask You Anything of Mark Gurman. You can send him questions ahead of time. You can get in touch with us.
Anything?
Anything.
Anything?
Yeah,
Thank you all.
People do.
Ooh.
We love it. It's a fun time.
All right, looking forward to it. Hey, Mark, thank you so much, as always, our Mark Gurman there. All right, folks, we're headed to a break. We're going to get back to the markets, talk a little bit about the currency trade. That's next.
It's 2:40 on Wall Street. I'm Amy Morris. A possible de-escalation in the Middle East conflict led to oil falling and stocks rising after President Trump said he would postpone strikes on Iranian energy infrastructure. We do check markets for you all day long here at Bloomberg. The S&P 500 up 1.7%, NASDAQ up 1.8%, the Dow up 1.9%, just about 2% higher now for the Dow. The 10-year Treasury yield at 4.32% and the 2-year yield at 3.81%. Bitcoin up about 4.25%, topping $71,000. WTI now down more than 11%, around $87 per barrel, and Brent crude down more than 12%, now $98 per barrel. Sources tell Bloomberg that President Trump's decision to postpone the deadline to reopen the Strait of Hormuz was aimed in part at calming energy and financial markets and followed private warnings from U.S. allies that the war was spiraling into disaster. Gulf countries have urged the president not to destroy Iranian infrastructure that will be crucial to keeping it from becoming a failed state after the conflict ends. LaGuardia Airport has reopened after it was closed for much of today because of the collision between an Air Canada Express plane and a fire truck, which killed the two pilots. You can expect more delays and or cancellations. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Amy Morris. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Now back to Bloomberg Businessweek Daily with Massar and Tim Stenovec.
All right, Amy, thank you so much. So our Bloomberg team watching global currency markets, writing early this morning that cross-asset relationships that macro traders rely on have been rewired since the U.S. war in Iran started. And the old playbook is no longer a guide to currency moves. And Tim, this is all happening as we've seen the dollar backtrack, falling sharply after President Trump said he would postpone strikes against Iranian energy targets for 5 days, something we kicked off this hour talking about. He cited, the president that is, citing, quote, good and productive talks on ending the war. There's some debate about what exactly is going on. And before President Trump's remarks, the greenback had touched the highest level since December on fears of a possible escalation in the Middle East. Again, based on our conversations, it sounds like that could still happen.
We'll see. Who knows?
We just don't know.
Who knows? Yeah. I want to bring in Jayati Bharadwaj. She's head of FX strategy at TD Securities. She joins us here in the Bloomberg Businessweek studio. The headlines that have been happening today, the back and forth, the whiplash that we've seen in markets, how are you making sense of that from an FX perspective?
First of all, thank you so much for having me back. But I think it's a very clear sign that markets are purely now hinged on the duration and the extent of the conflict. Everyone's just waiting for signs of that. But it did show a very clear sign that markets are also very happy and willing to fade the moves you've seen in the last couple of weeks. And they're looking for that glimmer of hope and optimism. And hopefully the good headlines you've seen come over in the morning. Hopefully if they get dragged out, then potentially you could see maybe outside of the oil market, other asset prices could go back to where they were. Oil markets are potentially the only ones where we see some permanent risk premium will remain embedded, given some of the energy infrastructure which has been destroyed. Maybe the new baseline for oil prices is not 60 anymore, but closer to 80. Whoa. But outside of that, asset prices, other than that, might be able to go back.
You said permanent risk premia. I mean,
a little bit more medium term, not in the sense
not
that it would remain,
yes,
but it will likely remain for a few years, especially because some of the energy infrastructure which was destroyed,
rebuild, right?
It'll take time and years to rebuild that. And even if there's a ceasefire, think about it, like you cannot do away with the risk of Iran feeling emboldened and then attacking again.
Can we go there? Because I think it's safe to say any of us who remember 9/11 or just think about the region as a whole, and you think about Iran's history with the United States, it's not been a good one for a long time. And you do wonder, do you leave a country, an entity, a regime that is even angrier at the United States? And I don't know that we can get a read on that yet. I think even the president was talking earlier. Did we overhear him saying something like that maybe he and whoever the next leader would be kind of having say in what happens in Iran next? So there's just a lot of interesting things going on. But are we wrong to think about, have we created a bigger enemy here? And maybe some disconnect, too, with the region as a whole beyond Israel, who probably maybe weren't prepared for all of this fallout and destruction.
The way we're seeing risk scenarios right now, there's only two probable outcomes. One is potentially a continuation of the good headlines you've seen, where potentially both sides have some sort of a ceasefire, like come to some terms and agreements on the basis of that, and both sides will be able to claim victory from that. I'm sure the US will say that we have eliminated part of the supreme leaders there, but Iran will also be able to claim victory in a certain sense. So both sides get that, asset prices come down. In that environment, we actually expect a good amount of selling pressure on the dollar to resume.
That's one scenario. What's the other one?
The other one is potentially if the talks do not go well, potentially this becomes a much bigger conflict, potentially bringing in a little bit more of the peers who've currently stayed on the sidelines. You bring in more peers, get them involved, and this becomes a very long-term strategic battle then. It's not just short-term. But it becomes a much more long-term strategic point, and that's where a nuclear chain reaction potentially sets off, because right now markets have outside of oil prices and then rates last week, equities and FX have been relatively very well contained. You've not seen the classic risk off even to this state play out. And then that is something that actually plays out, and then, it wreaks havoc on the markets.
Why haven't we seen that classic risk? Why haven't we seen that play out?
I think it's because of the nature of the way the shock started out. I'm sure a lot of people were expecting it to be a quick one and done like Venezuela. Mm-hmm. I'm sure even the US administration was expecting that. And nobody was expecting Iran to retaliate the way they have, or even expecting the kind of military strength that they have showed, that nobody knew that they had all of that. So in that environment, even now, people, given that this is a midterm election year, Trump has wanted the Fed to cut interest rates, the inflation price and prices shooting higher is not good for the administration, both geopolitically geopolitically, obviously NATO has declined to help. I think that's a very strong sign. So there's weak support both domestically and globally, which is why people were hoping that potentially this is something which is like Israel-Iran back in June 2025, where you had a shock to prices, but that lasted only a few weeks and then everything came back down. Right now, when I'm speaking to investors, they're extremely split. There's a good chunk of them still in that baseline, and some of them who have moved to that bad case scenario. But given the massive amounts of uncertainty, people are just stuck in the middle, and they have not been able to put on active risk behind any of those scenarios.
So where do investors want to go? I mean, we've been watching, the U.S. dollar really, really closely, which we've seen under pressure, and then we saw a rally coming off of this war. So I don't know, do you have a long and short, or short and long term thought on it, and how much conviction do you have on those? Or again, it goes back to these two scenarios.
In the short run, remain defensive. The dollar should remain tactically bid. It's not just because dollar is a safe haven, and there's still a big question as to whether it has been behaving like a safe haven or not. But the nature of the shock allows the dollar to behave like a safe haven because the U.S. is geographically insulated from all of this, energy independent, not as driven by tourism or supply chain interlinkages with the Middle East compared to the European Union. So the nature of the shock should allow the dollar to behave like a safe haven tactically, but I'm still not convinced that this dollar bounce should turn into an outright rally. And one very interesting evidence which I point out to in that is, if you just pull up the dollar chart since the start of the year, look at the dollar sell-off which happened when Trump and the US only threatened to invade Greenland, did not even invade it. And when the Fed did the rate check on behalf of the Ministry of Finance in Japan, the dollar sell-off you saw in that time was still much stronger than any dollar rally you've seen with this actual conflict in the Middle East in the last three plus weeks. So if all of this, if you get that off-ramp through the war in the summer, imagine the amount of dollar selling pressure which will come back with a lot more intensity.
A lot.
Because the Hedge America trade will be back with a lot more reasons to justify it now.
Jayati, we're going to be speaking on our program at a little after 4 o'clock to Ed Harrison about gold, but you mentioned the dollar potentially acting as a safe haven. We've seen the opposite from gold over the past few weeks. Why is that? That's actually a very intriguing question, and I love to answer it because the gold, we do know that retail investors did get very active in participating in that market, particularly in December and January, which was responsible for the massive chunks of move you saw then. FX markets to this date have still been the most macro fundamentally driven market, untouched by retail investors or speculative moves as much. That's why FX markets to me have been the most macro moving markets in all of this, which is, I think, is a very good sign for me to make sense of when things are moving, when things look too stretched.
You mean a better indicator of what's going on?
Yes, because the move in gold did have retail investor participation, the euphoria, the momentum, the FOMO trades at some times, but that was never seen in FX.
She's saying the smart money goes to FX. That's what she's saying.
Well, it is.
Don't repeat that in front of a gold analyst.
No, but it's such a massive market, right? It can tell you so much about the different trades. Such good stuff. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Jayati Bharadwaj, she is head of FX strategy over at TD Securities, joining us right here in studio. Have a good week. Safe week. Be well. All right, when we come back.
Stocks on the move. Alex Semenova is joining us. That's next on Bloomberg Businessweek Daily.